In a sealed laboratory drawer at the Max Planck Institute, a tooth extracted from a 4,000-year-old skull is waiting for its DNA to be read. In the British Museum, a clay tablet pressed in ancient Sumer records beings called the Anunnaki, those who descended from the heavens, who taught the first cities and the first laws, and who then vanished. These two facts seem to belong to different worlds. Ancient DNA has already rewritten the origins of entire civilizations. Now it stands at the very threshold of a stranger question entirely. The revolution began not with a theory, but with a tooth. In 2015, researchers at Harvard Medical School published a study that rewrote the genetic history of Europe. By extracting ancient DNA from burial sites in Hungary and Spain, and across the Russian steppe, they discovered something that shattered a century of assumptions. Europe had not been settled by one people slowly spreading outward. It had been reshaped, repeatedly and dramatically, by massive migrations of genetically distinct populations that arrived, displaced and merged with whoever came before them. The people who built Stonehenge were almost entirely replaced. Whole civilizations vanished not from history, but from the genome. This was not a fringe finding. It was published in Nature, replicated across dozens of subsequent studies, and it forced a fundamental rethinking of who ancient peoples actually were. What followed was a cascade of similar discoveries. A vast migration of steppe pastoralists, the Yamnaya, originating north of the Black Sea, had swept across Europe with a speed that archaeologists had not imagined possible. Within a few generations, their genetic signature dominated regions as far apart as Ireland and the Indian subcontinent, a distance of more than 5,000 miles crossed in the span of a human lifetime. They carried new languages, new technologies, and an ancestry that had not existed in those places the generation before. Ancient DNA did not just add detail to the historical record, it overturned it entirely. Enter David Reich, a geneticist at Harvard University whose laboratory has produced more ancient DNA data than any other research group in the world. It was Reich's team that first identified a pattern that no one had anticipated. In elite burial sites across the ancient world, in Neolithic Britain, in Bronze Age Iberia, and in the early graves of mainland Greece, certain individuals buried with exceptional wealth carried genetic profiles that did not match the surrounding population. They were anomalies, people of distinct ancestry placed at the centre of communities that were biologically different from them. This was not coincidence. This was hierarchy encoded in the genome, a record of people who had arrived from somewhere else and been remembered, through the objects laid at their deaths, as exceptional. These findings established something important. Ancient populations were far more mobile, far more stratified by origin, and far stranger in their hierarchies than the written record had ever suggested. The genome was revealing a world of hidden movement and hidden identity. It is against this finding, not as backdrop, but as direct provocation, that the Anunnaki question must be placed. Sometime around 3,500 BCE, in the floodplains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now southern Iraq, something happened that the archaeological record has not fully explained. Cities appeared. Not villages, not camps, not seasonal settlements. Cities with populations in the tens of thousands, with administrative systems, with taxation, with monumental architecture, and with a fully developed writing system that emerged within a few generations of the cities themselves. Scholars call this the Uruk period, the urban revolution, a term that captures their astonishment as much as the event itself. The Sumerians who built these cities left behind a literature of staggering complexity. They recorded legal codes, medical knowledge, astronomical observations, and their theology with a precision that implied centuries of accumulated learning. But the record does not show those centuries. The learning appears in the archaeological evidence, almost fully formed. And at the centre of that theology stood the Anunnaki. The name translates approximately as those of heaven and earth, or in older translations, the great princes. They were not worshipped in the abstract. The Sumerian texts, the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis epic, the hymns and lament poetry preserved on the thousands of clay tablets, describe the Anunnaki as specific beings with personalities, hierarchies and histories. They were credited with descending to Earth, with fashioning human beings to serve them, and with conferring the gifts of kingship, agriculture, and the measurement of time. The earliest Sumerian king lists, inscribed in cuneiform and dated to approximately 2100 BCE, record dynasties that preceded the Great Flood, reigns stretching for tens of thousands of years, held by kings described as part divine. Mainstream scholars call this mythological exaggeration. But Sumerian scribes were meticulous recorders in other domains. They believed something had to be remembered. The question that Sumerian theology raises is not merely religious, it is genealogical. The divine bloodline concept sat at the core of early Mesopotamian kingship. Sumerian rulers did not claim authority through conquest alone. They claimed descent, direct biological lineage from the Anunnaki themselves. This is not peripheral theology. It is inscribed across thousands of artifacts, embedded in the formal titles of rulers from Uruk to Akkad to Babylon. And it raises a question that ancient DNA science now gives us, for the first time, the tools to approach. What was the ancestry of those who ruled? Mainstream archaeology has a clear answer. These were human rulers using religious language to legitimize power. The divine bloodline was political theatre, effective and invented. This explanation is probably correct, but it does not entirely account for what the genomic record has begun to show. Enter Johannes Krauss, director of the Department of Archaeogenetics at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig. His team has spent more than a decade mapping the genetic history of the ancient Near East, sequencing bones from Iran, Turkey, and the Caucasus to reconstruct who lived where, and when, and from where they came. The picture that has emerged reveals a phenomenon geneticists call population discontinuity, the appearance, without a clear migration trail, of a genetically distinct group in an elite context, present in the burial record before any evidence of their arrival in the broader population. This was not assimilation, this was insertion. The ancient genomics of Mesopotamia itself remain, as of the most recent published studies, incompletely mapped. The density of sampling that transformed our understanding of prehistoric Europe has not yet been applied to the ancient Near East. The genetic composition of the Uruk period population, the specific people who first recorded the Anunnaki, is still largely unknown. Krauss's team has identified this gap as an urgent research priority. The data is coming, but it is not yet here. What can be said is this: if a genetically distinct group had arrived in or near Mesopotamia in the centuries before the Uruk period, they would have been experienced as profoundly different. They would have been remembered as such. In a world without a framework for genetics, the most available language for describing people who seemed to know things no one else knew, who came from somewhere else, who looked, moved, or spoke differently, was the language of the divine. This was not invention. This was the only vocabulary available. The pattern, furthermore, does not belong to Sumer alone. The Egyptian Netjeru, the gods who preceded the pharaohs, were described in almost identical terms: skyborn beings who taught civilization and withdrew. The Andean deity Viracocha appeared across multiple cultures as a figure who taught agriculture and stonework, then departed. The Vedic Devis of ancient India were described as sky-dwellers possessing knowledge unavailable to ordinary humans. These traditions arose independently, across cultures with no documented contact. Their structural similarity has never been satisfactorily explained. This is the question that the Anunnaki story poses, stripped of mysticism. It is not whether ancient people were visited by beings from another planet. It is whether ancient people were preserving, in the language of religion, a compressed memory of something that had genuinely occurred, a people, an encounter, a knowledge transfer, for which no other words existed. The sequencing of ancient genomes from Iran, the Caucasus and the Anatolian Plateau, regions immediately adjacent to the Tigris-Euphrates basin, some of them less than 800 miles from the first Sumerian cities, is ongoing. Each new dataset narrows the distance between what we know and what we do not. Myth is not noise, it is memory in the only form available. Whatever the Anunnaki were, the people who recorded them were not careless. They were preserving something they believed could not be allowed to disappear. Ancient DNA may one day tell us what,